The truth is, it's never fully sat comfortably with me to be called an entrepreneur. I guess I think of myself maybe as a reluctant business owner. He asked me a question that I didn't realise at the time was going to change my life. But the question was, I think if I look back, I'd always had an itch that I wanted to scratch, but I never really thought I'd have the opportunity to do that. I thought my path was through a pretty traditional path, but one day probably was 3 to 6 months worth of salary that I was risking for an opportunity that comes along maybe once in a lifetime. Sometimes I say if the me of 20 years ago had come to the me of today for advice, I would say, no, don't do it, you're utterly insane. Year 10, I'd slogged my guts out for 10 years and somebody turned around to me and said, yeah, your business is basically worth nothing. That was hard to hear.
Yeah.
We were running the largest lifestyle business you'd ever seen. And sometimes, I think as a leader, you realise you're running really hard, but you're not 100% sure you're running in the right direction. Where you're too small to be big and you're too big to be small, and that you just feel like you're just running harder and harder on the hamster wheel. I took a long, hard look at myself and thought, I need to become the leader the business needs me to be rather than the leader I want to be.
Neil Osmond, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me.
We've been talking about doing this for, I'm going to say, a couple of years.
Yeah,
really?
A couple of years, yeah.
So we're finally here. You finally made it.
I have.
It's good to see you. Good to see you as always. Neil, as you know the format. You've listened to a few of the episodes in the past. I always just like to go back to the early days of the entrepreneurial journey, the personal story, the entrepreneurial journey, because that to me is the spark. It's when things began to happen for everyone who comes on this podcast. So what were the early days like? Did you grow up in an entrepreneurial family? When did that spark first get lit?
No, and probably the truth is, it's never fully sat comfortably with me to be called an entrepreneur. I guess I think of myself maybe as a reluctant business owner, but yeah, I didn't grow up in an entrepreneurial family at all. My dad had quite a big job, worked in motor manufacturing, so I grew up in the Midlands, and so yeah, I went to school and then went to university, did an engineering degree. Never used a day of engineering in my life, but that's another story. And then yeah, through a number of strange coincidences, I ended up in the pharmaceutical industry. So I spent quite a lot of time, worked for SmithKline Beecham, GSK, AstraZeneca, and Sharon Plough and various others, doing lots of different jobs. If you look at my CV, which I haven't updated in 15 years, it'll pretty much say this is a guy that gets bored easily and moves on. And that's kind of took me to a place where I had a pretty reasonable job in the UK pharmaceutical industry. Had a team of about 16 people and was doing very well. And then I had an opportunity to start a business that I didn't see coming, and that's quite another story. But yeah.
Interesting. So you were just doing the traditional route, went to uni, graduated, you get into pharmaceuticals and working in all these big global businesses and doing well.
Doing well.
By the sounds of things. And then something obviously happened. So what was it? Was there a moment? Was there a meeting? Was there a connection? What happened?
Yeah, I think if I look back, I'd always had an itch that I wanted to scratch, but I never really thought I'd have the opportunity to do that. I thought my path was through a pretty traditional path. But one day, and for those of you who are younger listening, you might not remember some of these things, but it was 2005 and my desktop computer went pop and I couldn't get it to switch on. And I panicked because I wasn't very diligent in backing up my hard drive. So there was 3 months worth of stuff I didn't really want to lose. So in a panic, I called the most technical mate of mine that I had, who's a mate of mine called Brian, who I knew through my church, rang him up and said, please, can I come around, bring my computer, and please, can you resurrect it for me? And he said, yeah, no problem. And there I was sitting watching him very slowly run some clever program to resurrect it. And he asked me a question that I didn't realise at the time was going to change my life. But the question was, would you like to see something I've been playing around with in my spare time? And I only admitted this to Brian about 5 years afterwards, but not really, but
Yeah.
He's resurrecting my hard drive. So what do you say? So the answer was definitely yes. And he showed me that he'd managed to get hold of the data for all the cinemas and all the show times in the UK. And he plotted it on something I'd never seen before, which was Google Earth. And suddenly in 10 seconds, I could click on my nearest 4 cinemas and work out what time Batman's playing. And I could, I live in Hertfordshire, so 7:30 in Stevenage and 8 o'clock in Hatfield and 9:10 in Luton, and suddenly I could, I'm going to go and watch it in Stevenage tonight then. Now, to those of you who are used to broadband, that will seem strangely anachronistic. But for those of us who remember dial-up, before anybody had home broadband, that used to take me 10 minutes on 3 different websites to be able to make that decision. And now I could do it in 3 seconds. And I remember at the time saying to Brian, "Are you going to sell this?" And he said, "No, I'm not really into all that," because my mate Brian, who then you'll find out I started a business with, that's not really his bag. And so I pondered on that for a couple of days and thought, do you know what? I think I could do that. I think I could sell it. So we started to meet. I went back to Brian and said, "Is this something you'd be interested in doing?" And we started to meet every Saturday morning that we could for coffee and just talk about, if we did something, what would that look like? And that was for maybe about a year.
Just meeting up regularly, Saturday morning, have a chat, coffee, about this kind of digital mapping product.
Yes, right. What kind of products would we develop? But I think it was actually more around what kind of company we'd like to be part of, what would we like to run. But there were quite a few problems with doing that. So I think we've discussed this before, but at that point in time, I had a pretty decent job. I had a young baby. Unbeknownst to me, during that period, there would be another one on the way, and I had no money. I'd never sold anything. I didn't know anything about digital. I didn't know anything about mapping. And Brian and I had never worked together, and I'd never seen anything else he'd ever done. So
what could possibly go wrong?
Sometimes I say, if the me of 20 years ago had come to the me of today for advice, I would say, "No, don't do it. You're utterly insane." But I didn't have me to give me advice, and so we played around with the concept for about a year, and then, in another kind of sliding doorsy type moment, a few things came into place that allowed us to go forward. I could tell you the details of that, but in effect, those 3 things just happened, and we went, well, if we don't do it now, we'll never do it. And so we did it.
Amazing. I'm going to pause there for a second, because this was one of, I guess, several of those forks in the road.
Yeah.
I call it just a moment you're going along, successful as a employee of a large pharma company, doing well, small child, another one on the way. But so talk me through that decision-making process, because you went home, presumably spoke to your wife about it, said, "I've got this idea."
Yeah.
What did she say?
Well, I should say at the moment, my wife wasn't earning a huge amount. She's a nurse, does an amazing job. And if anybody ever says you've been successful, I'll say, not as successful as my wife. I've never saved a life, for example. But at that point in time, and then throughout, I think, I said to her actually this morning, I said, "I might mention you." She said, "Why would you mention me? I've done nothing." I said, "But I wouldn't have been able to do any of this without you." Right. And right at the beginning, she had to back me or not. And she went, "Well, you've never let me down before, so let's just go for it." And she had no reason to think that, but she did anyway. And so I was always grateful that she did that. Great. Brian and his wife also had to do the same. Brian, neither of us had any savings. And so we really were venturing into the unknown. But as I look back, one of the things, I think one of your guests previously said that entrepreneurs are risk managers, not necessarily risk takers. I thought it was a really good phrase, because in the end, how risky was it? I'm pretty confident that if it had all gone pop, then I would have been able to find another job in the pharmaceutical industry within 3 to 6 months. So it probably was 3 to 6 months worth of salary that I was risking for an opportunity that comes along maybe once in a lifetime. So how risky really was it? Not that risky, I would say.
Right. So the decision was made.
Yeah.
Then so you resigned.
Actually, one of the 3 things was I suddenly found myself with the opportunity to get a redundancy, which is what allowed me to work for Earthware, which is the company we formed, for a year without needing a salary. And that really helped. Really helped.
That was fortuitous.
It was, wasn't it?
Good timing.
Yeah.
Okay. So tell me the early days of Earthware. How did you get started, and what was the business plan?
Well, I guess if I were to say that Earthware, as it was in 2022 when we sold the business, was a creative digital agency specialising in healthcare. What we actually started was an interactive mapping company specialising in mapping software for residential estate agents, and that's what we started. So we maybe come to the point when we made the transition, but that's what we started. So we started selling interactive maps with really nice imagery that plugged into estate agents' websites. And we did that for a few months. We got our first client. In fact, one of our very early clients, it was just literally 300 yards from where we are now in Marylebone. And they were great, and they were brilliant advocates for us. And then after a little while, I realised that Brian's skills, he also could build websites. And so we started, getting clients that said, well, we can't put your beautiful maps in our terrible websites. So we'd say, well, we can build you a website as well. So we started building websites. So in the end, we did that for a little while and grew the business, and made some decisions. In the early days, we invested quite a lot in a 3D mapping product that never went anywhere. And we had to, unfortunately, lose half our people, which was only 2 then. And because that didn't work, but eventually you start working out what works for clients and what doesn't work for clients, and we can build up the business on that.
I'm curious about this. I hear quite often when you have, because there was 2 founders, 2 co-founders, you and Brian, and based on what you just said, you have different complementary skills. There's different skills. So Brian was the techie, I guess you would call it. He was sort of in the weeds, and you had to build websites and create all these sort of digital things. What were you? Were you more strategic, and were you in sales? Were you trying to sort of go and win customers? What was?
I think the answer is everything else.
Right.
So I never wanted to build a business around something I could do. I didn't feel that's a good thing for me personally. So I found somebody who had a talent that I could build a business around their talent.
Right.
And that really helped me. It really helped us to grow, because if something went wrong in the early days, if I was good at what we did, I'd put on my technical hat and probably go and solve it. Well, I never had that option. So I was always focused on growing the business and making the business as good as it was. And Brian was always taking care of the technical delivery, making sure the clients got great experiences and making sure we delivered what we said we were going to do. So that was, I'm not saying we never argued or we didn't have opinions that were differed, but generally we stayed in our lane throughout the whole thing. And, 20 years later and post-exit, and Brian's family and my family were playing shuffleboard on Saturday, so we still got on really well. And he's about the only person that might tempt me out of retirement. So, but
we might talk about that later. But I do see that, and I observe that sometimes where you have 2 co-founders where 1 + 1 = 3 or 10. If you have 2 of you or 2 of Brian, it's not going to work. No. But where you've got complementary skills and you get on, and yes, you can argue or discuss various sort of decisions, but you come to a conclusion which is best for both of you and for the business. That clearly it worked for you. So how do things go? You've got this mapping company and now a website building company.
Yeah. So I really think of building Earthware, which was a 15-year in the end, in kind of 5-year chunks. And the first 5 years was kind of building an interactive mapping company. And we did some amazing work in that time, and we were really blessed. So we did projects that we should never have done. So we built all the maps for the London 2012 Olympics. Right. So if you went and tried to work out where you were going to watch the torch relay, you were looking at a map that we built. I was super proud of that project. If you went on the journey planner not long after that of Transport for London to look at, how am I going to get around London, and you looked at a map, we built that. Right. So we weren't ever going to be a household name, but we got some amazingly big name clients like Skype and Microsoft and Financial Times because we were so niche. But that sounds great. But part of the problem was we were so niche. I knew all the other companies that could do what we did, and there were about 4 of them, and none of us were much bigger than we were, about 6 people. Right. So the market, the accessible market for us was never going to be very big. And so we had to decide whether that was something we were happy with or whether we were going to relook at our business and decide to, and I think it's the dangerous P word, as I like to think of it, but actually going to think about pivoting. And we did that around about year 4 and 5. And we decided to pivot back into healthcare. because that's what I knew. That's what where my network was. It was where I could access sales opportunities. But because I waited 4 years to do that, I actually felt like I knew what I was doing, rather than if I'd done it on day one, I probably would have burned a load of my network and relationships because we were too new to be able to be relevant in that market.
I find this really interesting as well. This concept of pivots. You start a business with a very credible idea and you're successful and you win some fantastic sort of blue chip clients, but then you've reassessed it. You said, even if we are really successful, we can never scale this to sort of level that may wish to. So then you kind of just thinking about, what do I know? What industries do I know? We've still got the technological capability, but if I can pivot towards something that I know and then join the dots and all that, so that's effectively a new company, a new with some basics remain the same, but in terms of clients and customers and sort of operations, it sounds to me like it's quite a different business.
It is, but we did it carefully over 5 years.
Okay.
So we did not want to lose our existing mapping reputation. We started a new brand, so that we didn't have any brand confusion. In the end, we realised it wasn't that important, but we did for a while. We operated 2 separate brands, and actually the big, and lots of people will say this, I'm sure, but if you run an agency, which is what I've run, then people are the engine of an agency. There's no escaping that. We don't have a product, so therefore people are what deliver the value that our clients really appreciate. So about that time, I managed to persuade an old colleague called Chris Finch to join our business. And now we had 2 people selling, and 2 people selling can sell twice as much as what 1 person can sell. Yeah. And so over that time, he focused on the healthcare and that transition, and I focused on the core original business and making sure that we didn't ruin our core business, but use it as a platform to grow. So, we were probably 80-90% mapping at year 5 and 80-90% healthcare at year 10.
Yeah, that's interesting. So that was a thoughtful strategic approach. You don't want to blow up the existing business, which is driving you revenue and I guess paying the bills, but whilst you're simultaneously building something new and different so that you can. So the pivot happens, but it's not an immediate. It's over several years.
Yes.
As you say, that's again, I think that's really valuable to anyone tuning into this. That strategic thought process, where you look kind of, and I think it is the main role of a founder and an entrepreneur, is to kind of look over the horizon, see the direction of travel, see where things are going, and try to push yourself in that direction where the opportunities lie, in your opinion. So that's what you did, and so what was the journey like? Did you continue then as that pivot, sort of slowish pivot, happened over a period of time, but it was all a continual growth story?
You have your ups and downs. So probably around about the time we pivoted, we were maybe 8 people,
right?
And by the time we got to year 10, we were probably more like 20 people,
right? So
we'd kind of doubled in, and agencies are quite easy to predict because you need a certain number of people to make a certain amount of revenue. So I can't remember the exact numbers, but probably doubled people, revenue, all those kind of things over that period of time. And you said it's quite strategic. I probably don't remember it being that deliberate, if I'm being honest. Everything always looks more deliberate as you look back on it. Where I think we became much more strategic is around about year 10 and pushing into the 5 years that followed. And that's where I think we really sat down and thought, what could this business become? What do we need to do to make it become that? In fact, probably the best way to describe that is, for the first 10 years, I was really doing the job I loved doing, spending loads of time with clients, getting really detailed into the projects. I really loved that. That's exactly what I love to do. But I realised that if the business was going to fulfil its potential, I needed to be a different leader, a more CEO-like leader. And so it was around about year 10 that I took a long, hard look at myself and thought, I need to become the leader the business needs me to be rather than the leader I want to be. And so I did a bit of a deal with myself that says, I can do that, but I'll do it for 5 years.
So is this phase 3 of the transition? So first 5 years was the company as was the original digital mapping business. Second 5 years was this pivot. to new business, and then the third 5 years was this new role, stepping into a new role and identifying. Did you get some? I remember you and I were chatting before. You got some feedback from good friends of yours.
Yes.
Yeah. So
I got some pretty tough
that.
feedback around year 10. There's also something else. I'll give you some of that feedback, but it really helped. I took a sabbatical about year 10. Took 7 weeks off because I was trusting my team. They could run the business. I think I only got one phone call. Chris rang me once, and I said, "Have you got this?" And he said, "Yes." I said, "Then that's fine." But I went, and it massively helped me to step back and look at the business. But around about that time, I also asked some friends of mine to have a good look at our business and tell me what they thought. And there was some uncomfortable truths in that. Yeah. So I remember Miriam, and she'll know who she is, but she still works in pharmaceuticals, so I might not use her second name. She spent a little bit of time with us, and her conclusion was that we were running the largest lifestyle business she'd ever seen. I remember my friend Nick Merrifield, who Nick went on to become one of our non-execs. He had sold 3 businesses by then, and he was really, he's all over the numbers. He's brilliant at that. And one of the things, he looked at us and he said, "This is how somebody would value business." And he started to add back in all the costs they would add back in. Like, we were on minimum wage at the time as the leaders of the business. And so, no, you need to add a market rate back in for that. And you're going to need to add this. And what I thought was a profitable business turned out to look, after he'd done his adjustments, basically to be worth nothing.
Ouch.
So at year 10, I'd slogged my guts out for 10 years, and somebody turned around to me and said, "Yeah, your business is basically worth nothing." That was hard to hear.
Yeah, I'm sure. But I guess it just, I don't know, sort of opened up, kicked a spark into you saying, well, I don't want to have the same conversation 10 years from now. Right. So that was, these things can be painful, but very, very useful as well, because that's just the unvarnished truth that they're telling you. There's no point in sort of sugarcoating it. Yeah. It is what it is. But the thing is, you were building a different business. You were building a business that you enjoyed working in. There wasn't that, based on what you said, there wasn't a thought necessarily. It certainly wasn't the foremost in your mind, I don't think. I want to build this business for sale and to create commercial value. It was, I'm just loving the work. I'm enjoying the clients. Yep. And I think that as well is also pretty common, actually, from a lot of business owners I've spoken to. They start off and there's not a ton of thought given to an exit, a sale value. So until which obviously that began to change your thought process and the way you work. So I want to talk about that in a moment, but I would like to pause for a second on this. I haven't heard anyone else recently, anyway, who've done a sabbatical.
Yeah.
What was your thought process? Did you feel it was just something you wanted to do? Were you feeling burned out at the time, or what was going through your mind when you decided to take that amount of time off?
Well, I'd read. I mean, I did quite a lot of reading, and somewhere I'd read a story of somebody who said it was really helpful to them. I was tired, not ridiculously so, but I think it was just part of me that said, I've run at this thing for as hard as I can for 10 years, and sometimes I think as a leader, you realise you're running really hard, but you're not 100% sure you're running in the right direction. Mm-hmm. And so I wanted to take some time to pause. And what happened after that was we actually encouraged anybody that hit 10 years in Earthware, they would get to take a sabbatical as well. So because I thought it was so useful to take time out, maybe every decade in your career, if you can. I know not everybody's able to do that because just not in the financial position to do that. But for me, it was really, really helpful. It was also around about that time that we started to connect because I read a book by Daniel Priestley. He then, because he's really good at marketing, rang me up, invited me to a masterclass. Well, one of his team did anyway. Yeah. And I met Daniel, and he has a concept in one of his books, which is about the entrepreneurial transition. And I've never seen anybody put it like this. But he talked to me about my business, and he talks about there being a kind of sweet spot up to about 13 people, and then something you can sell from maybe 50 people onwards. And he describes the bit in the middle as the desert, where you're too small to be big and you're too big to be small, and that you just feel like you're just running harder and harder on the hamster wheel and doing it for the benefit of almost everybody else other than creating capital value that you can then eventually get. And he said to me, he just went through what a leader needed to do to be able to transition all the way through. And he said that 70% of the leaders he meets, he sends them backwards. He sends them back to become just a much more revenue-driven, profit-driven lifestyle business.
Yeah.
And because for whatever reason, not everybody he thinks can make that transition.
Sure.
And so that really made me think for a while. And, actually it's not going to be easy. We're going to have to line everybody up. And so I told this story to my leadership team, and I gave them a month to think about, do you want to go? Which way do you want to go? Which way do you want to go? And I said, but I'm not doing it on my own. I'm not dragging everybody. We all go or we don't go. And I made them come back and present to me their reasons for wanting to go, which they did, including Brian.
Okay.
And they jumped on board and they said they want to do it. And that's when we decided we needed to do a whole load of change in order for us to be able to successfully make it through that desert part.
Yeah, that's super relevant, I think, because at least you had the awareness to go through that thought process. Did you so did this come up on your sabbatical, or was it just generally things you were thinking about?
I read his book on the sabbatical.
Right.
I remember I was cycling through London to the Churchill War Rooms when I got the phone call inviting me to the masterclass. That's how I know when it was.
All right.
And so I went to the masterclass just at the end of the sabbatical.
Right.
So it all coincided, I think, with a decision point of do we
and
go
you had
that way
the
or
time
do we
and space to be thinking about this as well, which I think is important. So you come back from your sabbatical and you go through this process with your team and say, right, we are, again, there's another form of pivot in terms of mindset, structure, strategy, because at that point the decision was to create an enterprise with capital value.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which it wasn't at that point, and your friend had made that very clear.
It rather brutally pointed it out,
Yeah.
yes. That's what we decided to do. But how to do that? Well, we had to still work that out. There's no perfect blueprint for that, or at least I didn't think there was. And we might come on to talk about this, but around about that time, I found a really helpful book.
Okay.
And only you ask, have any books ever influenced you?
Yeah,
One of
sure.
them that influenced me was I found a book called Agencynomics by Spencer Gallagher and Peter Hall, who I got to know a little bit after that because we invited them in to look at this.
I know Spencer.
So
Yeah,
Spencer's a great guy. And I read it, and it was like looking at the blueprint. I mean, it's called Agencynomics, but I think the subtitle is Take Your Agency from 0 to 5 million. And he and Peter, who are a really good team, a bit like I'd say me and Brian. Peter's a finance guy, and Spencer's very salesy. Yeah. And they wrote the book that basically put a blueprint for what a really good agency journey looks like, and it kind of gave us a load of clues, and we brought them into the business to have a good look at our business and also to get their personal recommendations, which when you're really small, investing in something like that, sometimes you think, oh, it's too expensive, we shouldn't do that. But that money paid itself back, as with many of our advisors, many-fold over the years. And so they helped us as well plot a journey from where we were to where we wanted to be.
Yeah. So did they help you? So this was really about getting a handle on your data and your numbers. That was what a business looks like that is at 5 million or worth X or whatever. So that gave you that opened your eyes to this is a blueprint. This is the model. Where are we now, and what does good look like?
Yeah, and we thought by the time we got them in, it was probably a year to 2 years into that journey.
Yeah.
And we thought we were doing pretty well then. We were quite proud of our growth for the last 3 years. And I'd remember another brutal conversation where Spencer looked at us and went, no. He said, you're sub-optimizing this business.
Right.
You've gone A, B, C in the last 3 years. You should have gone A plus 0.2, A plus 0.4, B plus 0.4, C plus 0.6. You should be way up here, and your ambitions are nowhere near ambitious enough. And in fact, of all the businesses I work for, they tend to hit the targets they aim for, but they don't tend to hit higher. So if you want to get more successful, you need to aim for higher targets. And he then outlined a set of targets that broadly for the next 3 years we hit. So because he said, not that, and so hence why sometimes advisors with their very simple way of getting you to relook at your business can make a big difference.
They can do. And that objective view as well from outside, with all their experience, but outside looking in at you can be very, very helpful. But what I'm picking up a recurring theme here as well, which is you are open to pretty direct and sometimes brutal feedback, aren't you? Which I think is a great thing, because many people aren't. Many people just don't want to hear it, because they feel anyone who started a business and is, stays in business and makes profits is successful and should be proud of themselves. But to have somebody to kind of hold your feet to the fire sometimes and say you're still underachieving, you haven't fulfilled your potential, can be uncomfortable but valuable. So you've been open to doing that quite a few times by the sounds of things.
Yeah, one of the things we changed in that last period, that phase 3, was we were much more explicit about what the values we stood for were. And one of those values was honestly open. And if you talk to anybody in Earthware, they'd know what that means.
Yeah.
And I tried to coach that there's a difference between being really honest and brutal, but I also hopefully never punished any of the team if they went across the line, because I'd rather know what they were thinking than not know.
Yep.
And so if they, it's much more important to me that they felt able to communicate what they were thinking, feeling, what was up. So we had some pretty brutal conversations within the organisation, as well as being open to getting people from outside the organisation to tell us what they really thought. Probably the best example of this, the one that really stopped me in my tracks, is when we got some non-execs on board who, so Nick and Gail, and also my finance director, Steve, they came on about 3 years before sale. And I will massively advocate getting good non-execs, as you know, because we mentioned this before. But before they took on the role, they spent a day with me, and it was the most brutal day I think I had, where they just grilled me about everything. And then they took a month, and then they came back and told me what they'd seen. And one of the things, the areas they've been asking a lot about is we're really passionate about building these products. And they just asked me, right, in that debrief, how many products do you think you've developed over time? I was like, I don't know, 12, 14. And how much do you think you're up or down on those? I was like, yeah, maybe a quarter to a third of a million down on that. Yeah. He said, but you've got this amazing agency over here that lots of clients love to use, and Neil, you're mostly ignoring that. Can we just all agree in the room today that you stop developing product for a while and concentrate on the agency that's doing really well? And that was probably one of the most brutal things I learned, but they were right. And that's part of what we did. We just got a lot more focused. I've always known I was a leader that was a bit like a magpie at times. I peck at shiny new things.
Yeah.
And so part of what I needed to learn was much more discipline, be much more deliberate, and focus on the things that we all agreed we were going to focus on, and stay focused on them until we'd exhausted that avenue.
Makes sense. And often this begins with having a vision of what good looks like. I know that because you and I have spoken in the past about this. We both have read a book which has been impactful called Vivid Vision.
Yeah.
Yeah. Tell me more about that, and anyone who hasn't read the book, because it's very insightful in terms of that idea of creating and making it visible as well.
Yeah. So Vivid Vision, if you find it, and apologies to the author, I don't necessarily think it's the most groundbreaking book, but it hit me at the right time. And I thought we had a vision, because our vision, I thought, was to solve real world healthcare problems digitally. Everybody in our team could tell you that sentence, but I didn't really realize that that's not really a vision. It might be a mantra or a target or whatever you want to call it, but it doesn't really paint a strong, compelling way of explaining how you're going to do that. So I remember doing this. I'm really keen that you develop with your team, so strategies, but this one was one where I hid myself on a Sunday in our meeting room with a massive whiteboard, and just worked on it until I got something that I was ready with and I was happy with. But it ended up being a 16-part vision, which to most people would probably make them go way too complex, and maybe it was way too complex, but I could explain it kind of have an element that everybody in our organisation could relate to, which meant that if we do that, it looks great, looks like this. And we even had an away day where we went through with discipline and going, are we red, amber, or green on this? And if we're not, what are we going to have to do differently on this big vision? And it also ended up being, I used it to explain to potential acquirers what made us special. What were we all about? Why were we different? And so in the end, it lived and really helped us with that as well.
Brilliant. But it creates that kind of tangible vision of what you're trying to do, what you're trying to achieve. I often think that people just show up in their work and their offices, and they haven't really got a clue about what the bigger picture is, what they're trying to achieve. So you make that real, articulate it, get buy-in, get engagement, and then repeat it, go back to it on a regular basis. Did you have to change your own role then as well? And I know you did, but this much more visionary CEO leader as opposed to someone who's kind of in the weeds every day dealing with the day-to-day.
Yeah, there was lots of change we did at the time, and one of the things we adopted, and I think looking back, you've had somebody on that talked in detail about this. So anybody that wants to refer back can probably get some more detail on that. But the entrepreneurial operating system we adopted, it was brought in by Chris, EOS, as most people know it.
Yes, EOS. I had Mike from EOS on the podcast before. Yeah.
So we did that, and one of the things we did there was look at our structure. And so I as the founder, you get in this, and everything goes through me. It's really important. Everybody's looking for me to solve the problems, that kind of thing. And it's not that healthy, especially as you grow. And so one of the structures EOS has is it changes that role to have a visionary, and then reporting directly to the visionary is somebody called an integrator, and then reporting into the integrator the main functions, usually 3, 4, 5 at maximum. And so I already had somebody in my business who was running sales who could easily do that integrator role. And so we changed and kind of split my role in half. So I did the more visionary stuff. I could think further ahead in the future. I could think more strategically, and rather than the business reporting through me, it actually reported through Chris, who became our MD, did an amazing job. But we also did a couple of things there, like Brian had a pretty floating role, and I asked Brian to stop floating and actually run our technology function, which he did brilliantly for all the years until we exited. So we really knuckled down and were much, much more disciplined about our roles. We actually wrote down what our accountabilities were, what our responsibilities were. We had a lot more clarity about that. And it probably took 12 months to transition. And I had to do a few things to help that happen. Like I didn't go to leadership team meetings for a while because otherwise everybody would start looking at me when they should have been looking at Chris. And so, I needed to give him a bit of space, but he was very patient with me during that transition. And eventually we found a way of making it work. But it did leave me able to look much further into the future and to think strategically and also concentrate on the things we needed to change that would have got us ready for our sale position.
So I'm detecting there's a pattern here now. You've got this vivid vision, and you're assembling the team and into the right people in the right roles, doing the right thing to support that vision, and using the EOS model, which again makes perfect sense to me. You mentioned back to the agency-nomics thing, because the other part of this is data, KPIs, tracking, information, and numbers, because it's all well and good. Visions are wonderful, but you've got to just effectively see how you're doing. On a wherever it's weekly, monthly, quarterly basis. How are we tracking? What sort of metrics were you tracking?
So by about year 10, I would describe running Earthware as a bit like our data, really a bit like driving a car with a rear view mirror but no instrumentation panel. So, and that seemed really strange for me because my background's an analyst. That's kind of my first job. I was, I can find my way around a spreadsheet better than most people. But I'd almost found that an alien thing to do. But I realized that we needed to get a much better at this. And by the time we exited, our management reporting and our reporting was, I think my Steve, our FD, said he's seen worse management report packs that go in PLCs, for example. We were we got really, really good at that, understanding our data. So a good example would be the Agency Nomics, the book, has a chapter at the back with a load of benchmarks about what you should be targeting as an agency. Really helpful, because it's very difficult to get that information anywhere, because agencies tend to be privately owned, so you don't really know what somebody's rent as a percentage of gross revenue is or anything like that. So they gave these benchmarks based on their extensive understanding. There was lots of them. So we picked 8 that we thought were going to be really important and where we were kind of red or amber. And we worked really hard on what would we need to do to get these to be green, or even we had a purple, which is exceeding by quite a lot. And by the time we got to our exit, we were green or purple in all of them. So we were disciplined in setting ourselves some KPIs that we thought were really important to the business, and then relentlessly pursuing them. And some of them were not things you'd think about. So, we probably spent 1% of our revenue on marketing.
Yep.
And they said you need to spend 3 to 5%. And actually we agreed. So we had to work out what we were going to do. So not all of it was saving money. Some of it was investing money in the right places. And so we did get there over time.
Yeah, so you've got the vision now. This is like what we call, this is a proper strategic plan, isn't it? You got the vision, you got the people, and now you know what good looks like in terms of the data and numbers, and you know where you are today, and whether you're red, amber, green, purple, whatever. But you're tracking against that, knowing what you have to do when you show up every day. Yeah. I think that's brilliant. I think it's beautifully simple. But honestly, I think probably the majority of businesses don't pull all these various strands together, at the same time. And I come back to this idea, because you've taken the decision after the brutal feedback that you'd had, that now I need to create some enterprise value in this company. So what does that look like then? What are literally the physical tasks and projects we have to do in order for that to be true? So we're now coming on to the kind of latter part of the journey, I suppose, having, you're on this mission now, and things seem to be going quite well and moving in the right direction. When did you begin to think about a sale?
So when did I start to think about a sale? I said about 5 years out, I understood that we needed to change to create a business that would be saleable.
Yeah.
I wasn't necessarily focused on actually selling anything. That wasn't why I got a days to, we didn't talk to any corporate advisors. We didn't do any of those things. It was actually really late on before we started to think actually about that. And there were a couple of triggers that made me think maybe now's the right time to have a look at that, which I probably shouldn't and wouldn't go into because they were a little bit more private. But it got to that point where I thought it'd sell, but really I think there were 3 main things that were bothering me. And they were broadly in the camp of what's the right thing for the company, what's the right thing for our people, and then what's the right thing for me and the other shareholders. So I started to realize that we'd actually grown to be a full service creative digital agency in the pharmaceuticals, but we were still very niched in an area of that pharmaceutical life cycle. And actually to access the bigger budgets, the more interesting projects, we didn't have a global footprint. We weren't at the table earlier in the product life cycle to get the bigger value projects, and often if you don't get those, you don't get the subsequent projects. So we weren't sitting at the right table when the big decisions were made. And I started to realize that in order to get to that point, we needed to grow tenfold, or we needed to be part of an organization that was already in those conversations. I also realized we just had such a talented team. I love my team, and we're really good at developing our team as well. We tended to keep people, so a lot of the people that were part of Earthware were part of our intern program, and we picked them up while they were still at university, and they joined us and went on a 6 or 8 year journey with us. And I just recognised that I wanted to give more opportunities for them to develop and have bigger roles and more interesting roles, and I wondered whether we could really provide that in the organisation that we were able to run without going big again, finding our way from 30 to 100 people, for example, which is going to be a very different thing. Yeah. And that kind of brings me on to me, which I started to become aware that I'm not sure. I'd done it for 15 years. I was tired, and I wasn't 100% sure I had what it took to go that 30 to 100. To go from what we were to 10 times what we were, which is what you would need to do in order to access those bigger, better projects and to give more opportunities for the people. So it really got to that point. And I also had a conversation with somebody I'd met during a program that I'd signed up to called KPI, and that guy's name was with Alan, and, and I'm speaking to him again today, who challenged me about, have you got any plan for exit? Do you know when you're going to do that, what it is? And in fact,
I wasn't selling, I wasn't pitching you.
No.
I mean, for those who don't know, yes, we were both on the Key Person Influence program a few years ago, and I would just say that I really enjoyed that program. I used to meet up with a group of other business owners and entrepreneurs and sort of chew the fat, and you and I are obviously still in touch from those days. But of course, we bring our own identities and the work that we do in our day jobs into those conversations. And you were kind of loosely talking about that. And I was just saying, effectively, I was saying in simple terms, have you determined your number? Do you determine how much you need to? Yeah. And we had that conversation developed. Yeah.
And that really sat with me. So in fact, I would say for a little while I obsessed about that, which is, how am I going to know? Your comment that I remember was, you end up being involved and working out what the right number is after the event. And so if you're working with somebody that's exited, it's no good knowing that number after the exit, because you've either got it or you haven't.
Right.
But if you haven't, then you've got rid of the thing that actually would have allowed you to then get it. And now you might have to start again, or go and get another job, or find another career or something.
We'll just make it clear for those who don't understand, what this kind of magic number is really all about.
So, am I allowed to tell the actual story of what happened? So,
of course you can.
Yeah. Because I didn't really know how much I would need to live the life I wanted to for the rest of my life. I didn't know. You can have a guess at it, but I'd never done any rigor, and I didn't really have any confidence that I could work it out within 10%. And 10% is quite a broad range when you're selling a company. So you and I had a conversation, and we talked about some other things I did, and we did a bit of a trade, if you remember.
Yeah.
So I said, I'd really like some help finding the number, and you said, I'd really like some help training my team in Agile. I said, well, I'll do that, and if you can help me with the number. Which is great. I think they call it the Cornish economy some places, which is
it's a trading economy. It's exactly. Just you do this for me, and I'll do this for you.
And so you introduced me to a member of your team called Charles Riches. Brilliant case of nominative determinism.
What a great name for a financial advisor, Charles Riches.
And the process you took me through, I think, or your team took me through, was really, really helpful. And you took Brian through it as well.
Yeah.
Because it doesn't really matter what my number is if Brian's is more. And so we had to work out where we were at. And we took through, and what I loved about it is you refused to do it without our partners being involved, our wives. So you do it together, and therefore you asked us all the really difficult questions about what do you want to do? How long do you think you're going to live? What do you want to do with your kids? Are you going to pay for their university or not? What kind of holidays do you need to go on? What kind of house do you want to live in? What kind of, do you want to do any work after? And suddenly there was all these questions that I'd never thought about really. But you took us through a process and used some really clever modelling, as I remember. And in the end, you gave both of us a number which I think we've only ever shared with each other.
Yeah.
And so therefore that was the kind of last piece in the puzzle, because once I knew what the number was, we knew that if anybody ever came in with that offer, we know we'd be fine.
Yeah.
And there's an argument that says, if you sell for more than that number, then who have you been working for? Because as soon as you've hit the number, after that, I'd make an argument that everything else is vanity, because you don't need it.
Yeah.
Or you're working for someone else. And so it was quite an important and transformational period where we sat down, and Brian and I could look at each other and go, if it's that, then we know we have the option to sell if we choose to.
Yeah.
But it has to be to the right person. They have to be able to look after our people, various things. So it wasn't we'd definitely do it, but at least we knew we could.
I think that's the point. You go into negotiations then knowing, back of your mind, you're not going to disclose it to any buyer, but you say, provided this is the number that we get, they were okay. So you're up for discussing, negotiating, choosing one buyer. You may therefore not choose the highest bidder.
Correct.
Because you might have sufficient with a lower bidder who you just like. They're a better buyer for you. Okay.
Yep.
And I'm not here just trying to. This podcast is not about me sort of self-promoting, but thank you for raising it. It's something I think every founder, every entrepreneur should have in their sort of back pocket to say is, provided the business is worth X, or the shares that I own are going to be worth that, that is sufficient money for me to live for the rest of my life in a style to which I become accustomed, and I want to do, factoring all those aspects of lifestyle and kids and family and holidays and whatever it is. And you model it in, and then once you know that, then you're just better informed. You make better decisions armed with that number. And you're obviously a smart guy, and you weren't crystal clear about your own personal number there. So you get that, and as you say, it's the last part of the jigsaw puzzle, really. So you've got that. You've come to your own conclusion that we are getting ready now for sale. So what happened? I mean, talk me through the sale process. Was it a competitive position, or how did you find your buyer?
So eventually we engaged some corporate advisors who were recommended by our finance director, and we engaged them to have a look. And I genuinely thought that they were going to have a look and come in and tell us what we need to do for the next 3 years. I don't know if you want me to make any assumptions about whether everybody who listens is going to know what a typical sale process was, but most
won't.
So in that case, there's really 3 phases of it.
Right.
For us, well, maybe 4, because there's a phase before selling where they came in and looked at the business, and I was expecting, they poured over the data. They spent maybe a month or 2 looking at everything, and I expected them to come back with a plan that took us for the next 2 to 3 years to a point where we could sell. What really surprised me is they came back and said, we think you should go now. We think you should go to market right now.
Right.
So we didn't have a lot of warning, and so the 3 phases really are that you go into, you send out a flyer anonymously. It doesn't say who you are,
right,
to a group of organisations that you think might be interested, and we didn't really know what we wanted to do next. So we went quite broad. So we went out to private equity. We went to private equity backed trade organisations, and then trade organisations, and they give you quite very different deal structures and things like that. But we weren't 100% sure what we wanted. So we cast our net broadly. We got, I was not expecting this, but we got more than 10 offers in the first round. And then what you do to get your offer, by the way, is you do what's called an IM, which is information memorandum. I can talk about that a little bit as well if that's interesting.
Yep.
And then you go to your third round, you go to management presentations. You select some of those to go forward with, and then you go meet them and find out what they're like and talk to them. And it's actually really, I really enjoyed it. I know maybe other people say it's hell on earth, but I really loved it.
Right.
And one of the things I really loved was putting together an information memorandum, because it allowed me to reflect on what made us special. Okay. And you don't often do that.
Did you do it yourself? Because normally it's the corporate advisors would do that.
So we're a creative digital agency, and the IMs we were kindly shown looked like boring presentations to me, and I wasn't going to try and sell a creative agency with bullet points and spreadsheets. So we decided that we were going to go a different way. So pretty much with some help from my team, but remember, as with many of these, there were very few people in that small team that knew we were doing this. So I wrote it, and I got some real help from I was part of an IT leaders group, and one of them was kindly shared me his IM, which he'd loved doing, and it gave me a load of ideas, which is great. But it told our story. And if I were to give some advice to somebody who's 3 years out, I didn't do this, but I wish somebody had told me. I would now sit down, take time, and write an information memorandum, the IM, which is probably a 30-slide presentation that describes your business in a compelling way. But write the one you want in 3 years, but write it now. And if you wrote it now, that would give you the clues to what you need to do for the next 3 years to have in 3 years' time the organisation that you want when you sell it. But I didn't do that. But that would be my advice. But it was just so much fun to look at all the things we've done, and to all the people we've managed to attract, and all the brilliant clients we'd had, and all the projects we'd done, and the technologies and the products and the awards we'd won. So I actually really loved that part of the process. What I would say is, though, for that last year, I was tired because I was basically doing 2 jobs. One, because I couldn't take the foot off the accelerator for the business, my core role, but I was also doing this role that I couldn't tell hardly anybody else I was doing.
Yeah.
And so that's a tiring year, or maybe 6 to 8, 9 months it was for us, because it was quite quick for us. But, for most people, it's probably a year.
Yeah.
And that was, you were doing basically 2 jobs. I had to talk to my own family about how Dad's not going to be around on weekends much, and he's not going to be, and I couldn't tell them exactly why, but I could tell them, that I'm really sorry, but it's only for a year.
Right.
Because it can be quite brutal that year.
It's good to flag that up, actually, because that is the truth, and pretty much everyone I've spoken to in this podcast about the sale process says it's exhausting. And you do have this dual challenge. The whole point, you're selling a going concern, and you want that to be flourishing and going in the right direction. So you've got to be busy in the main day job. And I think it's very interesting as well that you can't, it's not as if, sometimes if you share the load and tell your team and they can pick up parts of it, but by definition, you can't be sharing it with many other people. Yeah. And therefore it's a sort of closed thing. You're sort of busy beavering away in the evenings and weekends just to do the stuff to support the deal happening. So yeah, you need to prepare yourself for that.
So there were 4 of us that knew in our business.
Yeah. And that was it. Yeah, it's just speaking amongst yourselves, trying to get this done. So, and it takes 6 to 9 months in your case.
Yeah.
What was it like after the deal closed? I mean, what did you collapse into exhaustion the next day?
So I know an awful lot of people that have exited now. You just end up meeting loads. I'm sure you do as well.
Yeah.
And how do I describe this? I think there's a massive difference with the stories they tell me, and I can relate to this. There's a massive difference between your experience of the sale and the buyer's experience of the sale.
Yeah.
So that, your experience is you've been working at this really hard, and I've been, weekends, evenings, everything, and you get this thing across the line, and then you're absolutely shattered, and the first thing you want to do is just have a quick holiday at least.
Yeah.
But for every buyer, they've been waiting and waiting and waiting for this thing to get across the line. They get it across the line, and it's like, you've been on a roller coaster, but they've got a brand new toy.
Right, yeah. They want get busy, get working with this new toy.
Paid for the promise, and now they want to deliver against that promise, and I totally understand that.
Yeah.
And so you have to quickly get your head in the game. I think really quickly get ahead in the game. I think the other thing is, if you're not ready to allow somebody else to make the decisions about your business and to work for somebody, don't sell yet. Because the day after, it's not yours anymore.
That's right. Yeah.
And that's absolutely as it should be.
Yeah, of course.
And so if you're not ready for that, my advice is don't do it. And you hear this a lot. I think you had Rachel.
Yes, yeah? Rachel Murphy. Yeah.
Rachel Murphy. I think her. If you want to listen back, her description was quite interesting to me about her time after that. But that wasn't mine. Part of the reason we chose the people that we sold to was because they were really lovely people, and they are really lovely people.
Right. Yeah. And that's important.
And so it was a really important thing to do that. But
but get used to it, because the day after you've sold, it's no longer your business. You've probably got a boss. You're probably reporting to somebody, and they're going to do things differently to how you thought. But that comes with the territory. If you don't want that, you can't sell.
I've got to say, I'm part of a group of IT leaders. I'm sure they won't mind me saying this, but it's incumbent upon you to go back and explain your story once you've sold, and there's probably 30 of them. So I've heard a number of stories, and for quite a few of them, even within 3 months, when they come back and tell you their story, I look at them and go, well, there's some miserable millionaires we've got here.
Yeah, exactly.
Because they're not ready for that transition, or it's really difficult for them, and I think it is for most people, because you've spent years and years building something that's built around your image of what you want.
Yeah.
And now it's not anymore, and that's fine.
Yeah, and it is fine, or you're going to have to get used to it. But there's also, I think, the autonomy and freedom that you had when you're running your own business. That's, I guess, one of the main reasons a lot of us do it. You love that idea of just doing your own thing, and you might get things wrong, but you try to get some things right. But you've got that control and that independence and freedom, which you pretty much have sold now, and you're part of something else.
Yes.
And yeah, go on.
Yes, but one of the things I think I'd really recommend people to do is really think about how you sell your business. So we were really deliberate about not selling our business, but selling the business that our buyers would have with us as part of it. So to be really clear, one of the things, we had a creative digital agency, but we were known in the marketplace for being really innovative and being able to develop products. I joked about it earlier that our own products may not have been particularly successful, but we did design, build products for other people that were very successful.
Right.
So we had this kind of innovation and product engine. And we also had, best in class digital expertise. So when I was talking to the potential acquirers, I would use it was different for different ones, but particularly I'd use a slide where I had their business and their verticals and what they did. And then we'd position it and go, well, here's our vertical. We're clearly a vertical business that you can add on immediately and it becomes another P&L. But also we have this capability of digital capability, which we would hope you could deploy across the whole of the organization to improve its digital adoption and the business it can do out of that. But also, if you have anything that you think you should be able to productize, we also have a product and innovation engine that you can buy. Yeah. So you're kind of buying 3 for the price of 1. Yeah. Is the way we positioned ourselves. So, and also because of the way that Brian and I had been doing the jobs, and part of it was deliberate to be a visionary, then we already had a team that were running Earthware.
Yeah.
They were running it really well. And so for any acquirer, we were as surplus or otherwise to requirements, Brian and I, as you want. Yeah. So if you wanted us to use us somewhere else, you could take us out of that business and we'll spend some time developing product or helping you to innovate or drive digital across some of your other parts of your business. And so that's how we positioned ourselves in sale. And so my advice is don't sell your company, because I see so many slides about we've done this and we've done sell the company, sell what the acquirer's companies can look like with you as part of it.
Yeah, I think that's excellent advice. It's you're selling the story. You're selling, rather than just sell the history. This is our number. This is what we've done in the past. You sell the future, don't you? If you acquire us and we slot into your organization, this is what a bright, wonderful future should look like, and that's why you should pay us so much money to achieve that. But I think that's important as well. To just get that trigger in the mind of the buyer. Actually, that's right. It's a point. If we do buy this, the kind of the knock-on impact within our broader organization can be significantly more than just the pure, the revenue or profits that we're buying from this company. So I think that's great advice. Now you are what, 3 years from the deal?
Yeah, 3.5.
3.5 years. How are you feeling? I'm trying to get to this bit about, a number of people talk about it. It's like the post-exit identity crisis type thing. How are you feeling?
Well, I'd say great.
Okay.
I have to be really careful because it feels a bit like gloating sometimes. But I stayed in the business for 2 years.
Okay.
And then left the business 18 months ago. There were some things I don't think you can truly know until you've left. So one of which was, would I get itchy feet? Would I need to do it? Because about half the people I've seen exit go and do it all over again.
Yeah.
Half of them don't, but half of them do.
Yeah.
And I don't think you're going to know which one of those you're going to be until you do it. And the truth is, I'm pretty confident now that I'm one and done.
You're not going to go again?
I don't think I'll go again. But I'm really enjoying doing some things that I wouldn't have otherwise had a chance to do.
Okay.
And actually, once you've got your exit, that surely should be part of the value of doing an exit is you've got options. You can choose what you want to do. Yeah. You don't have to go to work tomorrow. Yeah. You don't have to earn a certain amount of money because the mortgage needs paying. And so it's enabled me to do some other things like, so I coach kids hockey, I coach kids cricket, I'm going to become chair of the board of governors of a local primary school next, from September. I'm going to, I'm volunteering for the International Bomber Command Centre in Lincoln, and doing some things that otherwise I would have had to have said no to.
Sure.
And I'm really, really enjoying that. I'm also trying to become a bit better at tennis and golf after,
sure.
but which is harder to do in your 50s than in your 20s.
Yeah.
But I've got some good coaches, and
you've got more time on your hands to practice.
I certainly have more time on my hands to practice. Yeah. But the other thing is you can focus on what's really important. So I spend more time with the family.
Yeah.
got a much better relationship with my kids than I had, because I can actually spend time with them. I can, I'm present. Now, there's possibly another question to my wife and family about whether they think that's a good thing, but for me, I've really enjoyed it. So yeah, that's where I'm at now.
That's great. No, I'm pleased to hear it. Pleased you come across that you're thriving, you're doing well. You are not one of these people who has struggled, because you've been able to keep yourself busy and use the now time you've got without the necessity of having to show up in an office or a business somewhere to do that. But you've been thoughtful about it and keeping yourself, active and engaged. And knowing you like I know you, I don't think it'll be the last time you'll be involved in business at some level. I'm not necessarily saying you're going to sort of go again and start a new business, but I do think it's important that the knowledge and experience that people like you have got isn't just sort of doesn't dissipate onto around the golf course or a hockey ground or something like that necessarily. So we might see a bit more of you in some format or another in the business world.
Yeah, I've done a little bit of angel investing. I've done also I'm mentoring a number of people. But I think I would now. I would like to do more than that. But you need the right opportunity. So I'm not working very hard to try and find them proactively. Yeah. But if they came to me, then I'd be really open if I thought it would help somebody on their journey. I mean, you and I both know how difficult the entrepreneurial journey is. It's really rewarding. Yeah. It's really difficult. Yeah. And if you can find some shortcuts from some people who've been on that journey and got the scars and for it, then I think that's really helpful. And I was really lucky. I had some really good people around me that advised me on the journey. Yeah. And I still fell into a number of holes, some of which I was advised not to go into, but I still did it.
You insisted on.
But, if I can be helpful to other people on that journey, I'd certainly be up for that kind of conversation.
That's brilliant. And it's great of you to say so, because exactly right. I do think that those who have been in the trenches and got the battle scars to prove it, those are the people who are valuable to help others. And frankly, that's one of the main reasons I started this podcast, is because there's people like you who have, got the T-shirt and all the rest of it, but there's others who are on the journey who are 1, 3, 5, 10 years behind you, who just want to tune into this. If you can listen to a podcast for an hour or so and pick up something, that I hope is going to be of value to them on their own business journey. Just on that point, and I know that you don't necessarily, screaming it from the rooftops, but if somebody did want to get in touch with you, I mean, because you're sort of off social media. Are you on LinkedIn or?
Yeah, I'm off social media because it was kind of an experiment with one of my children. Right. So one of my children, we had a discussion about how healthy social media was for them, but they were saying, yeah, but everybody's on it, Dad. And I was like, well, what if I came off? Would you come off? Right. So we've been off for about 5 months now. And when I say off, we still do WhatsApp, still on LinkedIn, but everything else we shut off. Right. And I'm in a lucky position that I can do that. I don't need that for my job anymore, but I don't miss it. I really don't miss it. Sure. So, yeah, I'm slightly off, but I'm still on LinkedIn.
So you're still on LinkedIn. So I'll post the link to your LinkedIn profile on our on the show notes. So if somebody who's listening to this and just says, I wouldn't mind just sort of picking your brain about something and just jumping on a call, you're open to do it. That's very good of you to say so. I appreciate that. As you know, because you have, and I can tell by some of your answers to the questions, you've done your research. You've listened to quite a few of the episodes that I've done here in the past. There's a particular way that I always like to sort of round it up. The first thing is, and you've mentioned them all so far, but there might be others. But in terms of resources, I know that you're an avid reader of books. You mentioned 2 or 3 on our conversation so far. Are there any other books or resources that you would recommend to entrepreneurs?
Yeah, I mean, my view has always been great leaders are great readers. And I wonder where leaders that don't read get their inspiration to change and be better. But, I could have read more. I'm sure there are people that have read a lot more than me. There were kind of 3 books I think had the biggest positive influence on my journey. One of them I mentioned, which was towards the end, which is Agencynomics. But that's only really relevant if you run an agency. Right. The first book, and I read this book when I was maybe 22. I'm not even sure it's still in print, but it's an amazing book and I loved it. And it's called Maverick by a guy called Ricardo Semler. Ricardo took over his father's manufacturing business in Sao Paulo, Brazil. So everybody's going, how's that relevant? Yeah. He tried to run it for a bit like his dad, but he realised it just wasn't authentic to him and he couldn't do it. So he gradually looked at everything about that business and everything everybody told him to do and ripped up the rule book and tried to do it differently. And he became incredibly successful within the realm of a manufacturing. I mean, as from memory, they manufacture the backs of ovens and fireplaces and stuff like that. It's not Google. But I loved it so much, and I loved the thinking about it, that every time, certainly for the first 10 years, every time we got a new employee, I'd buy them the book and write a little note in the front that just said, "Welcome to Earthware, help us be more maverick." So I love that book.
That's unusual. I haven't heard anyone mention that. Some books come up reasonably regularly, but that's not one I've heard of before. So that's great. Maverick.
Yeah. I'm sure I can give you some of the regular ones as well, because I've probably read a few of those.
Yeah,
but
sure.
The other one is probably the most beautiful business book I ever read, which is called Business Model Generation. Sounds really boring, but honestly, it's a brilliant book. It's by Osterwelder and Pignot. I've actually seen Alex Osterwelder speak. He's really good on his feet as well. But it's examining what a really good business model looks like and getting you to write it down on a one-page canvas. That sounds really trivial, but the book is brilliant at walking you through what all the different types of models are, why are they relevant, why you need to understand all the different elements, and if these 9 boxes on their canvas, and it's fabulous. We've even used it. Brian and I used it once when we did a hackathon in Norwich with the team that we did down there, because you've got 54 hours to design a business. It's perfect. Right. It's one canvas, design your business. It's fabulous. And even a business like ours, or even a massive business like Google, you can describe in one page.
Yeah.
And we go back to some of those things, those many metrics.
Yeah.
I think Richard Branson says it's complex to make things simple and simple to make them complex.
Yeah.
And actually, if you can boil the complexities into something that you can keep in your head, or you can put on a wall, or everybody can remember, that's really helpful. And I think that book is fabulous at doing that.
I think that's great as well. I think, it's simplicity is the ultimate sophistication. That's Leonardo da Vinci. But the ability to, because most businesses are a little bit complicated. If you try to explain to somebody, or the proverbial 30-second elevator pitch, but if you can distill everything down to the core essence and have it on one page or one sentence, I think it just helps in just all the things that you do, both recruiting, winning business, all those things. So that's a great suggestion. Do you have one more?
No, but I will tell you, I remember probably the best bit of advice I've ever got, if that would be helpful.
Yeah.
And this is really for CEOs, but I remember during lockdown, I found, I don't know if anybody else did, but I found lockdown by far that year to be the far hardest leadership year I've done in 25 years of leading anything. And I wouldn't say I did a particularly good job of doing that. Yeah. I found it really hard not to be able to see my team, interact with them. I don't read people particularly well, and it's much, much harder to do that through a screen. So I really, really struggled. So after a little bit of feedback from Chris, my MD, I went and got myself an exec coach and called Keith Johnson, and I did did a program of 6, and I got to the 6th one, and I asked him a question, and he said, "That's not how coaching works, Neil." I said, "Well, I want an answer." Right. So I asked him, because he'd done some really big jobs. I asked him, what does a really great CEO do? And he paused, and it felt like for about 10 minutes, but I'm sure it was more like 10 seconds. And he said, "You can be any type of CEO you like. You can be a salesy CEO, a financy CEO, you can be a marketing, product, process type CEO, you can be any of those. But there are 4 things that you cannot delegate and you have to own." And he said the 4 things are vision, where's this business going? Strategy, how are we going to get there? Culture, which is what's it like to work in this place? And then people, and he said people were really about 2 things. So 1, it's about what the people practices around here, because they drive the culture. What are we going to do here? Are we going to have awards? Are we going to be competitive, collaborative? What are we going to be? How's this really work? And then the first 3 levels. So he said, as a CEO, you can't just own the people that there, but you have to take a massive interest and make sure you're part of the hiring process for the people below, because they are your next leadership team. Yeah. And you can't delegate that. You have to be involved in that. And I thought that was one of the best bits of advice that I've ever got.
It is.
Credit to you.
It is. And just to define the role of CEO, that's the important thing, because it's difficult. It's kind of a bit fluffy. There aren't necessarily hard edges to it. So, and everyone is different, as as he said. So that's great advice. Well done. Thank you. Now, you know the ropes. Last question I've got for you. Now, somebody, and again, interesting. I guess you've shared it. You've achieved your number. You've achieved business success, clearly financial success. When we talk about wealth and the definition of true wealth, what's your personal definition of true wealth?
I always think this is easy for somebody to answer without referring to money when they have some, which I'm always conscious of, and that's really easy because of that. But you can only say from your own personal point of view. And actually, the story of Earthware was Brian and I share pretty similar values, and we're not people that want boats and islands and all those things. There are plenty of people that do.
Yeah.
That wasn't our story. So we enjoy stupid things like I'll go out on a bike ride with him. It costs nothing really other than what bikes cost us, and we'll do things like that. So for me, wealth has always been about for me it's about happy marriage, happy children, great friendships, and then leaving a legacy. So some of the things I now do are to try and leave a legacy, even if it's somebody can pass a ball on a hockey pitch a bit better than they did before. Actually that's enough for me. That's wealth. And so I don't think I ever measured it in numbers. We were never that money motivated, Brian and I. We were just trying to build something that was run on a set of values that were important to us and did great work for our clients, and that was enough.
That's fantastic. That's a great way to answer that question. Really appreciate your time today. It's been an incredible journey. As we say, you and I have known each other quite a few years now. Yeah. So it's lovely to kind of put a bow on the story for you to be able to share it. Because I don't know all the things you've shared today, and I knew some of them. But for you to be able to share this publicly has been brilliant, and it'll be of so much help to many others on their journey. So for now, Neil, thank you so much.
You're very welcome. Thank you for having me.